are these people?
Line of the signs on a red flag, bright red, so you let it in, let it inside, you'll see it, it's fed. Never your mind, that it grinds your mind, that it grinds yourself, that it bleeds you dry, that it dies on the dead.
Good.
Here's where our leaders would see us all led.
And we're very excited to have a very special guest for our first segment. Please welcome Chairwoman of the African People's Society Solidarity Committee, organizer, activist, and author of the book Overturning the Culture of Violence, Penny Hess. Welcome.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much, Collin, for having me on.
Thank you, and we're very appreciative of we
are not with where the majority of Americans are.
Fans. I don't want to say that in that way, but
that is extreme. That is an extreme way of thinking.
In terms of, having had a Keeley on last month, and Tara Reid, who is also our colleague, also interviewing the chairman.
Yes.
A couple of months prior to that, just getting to know more and our audience to know more about the movement. And obviously with the FBI raid last year, why it was significant, that the movement was targeted. So very fortunate that you're here. And I think for a very pertinent conversation that we've been having, I think in terms of reparations and, solidarity and what that looks like, especially multiculturally. And you've done a lot of work and research on that. So I'm really looking forward to, this discussion with you. So very happy you're here.
Looking forward to it too. It's so great to be here.
So, well, let's start off, just tell us, about you and your origin story and how you became involved with the movement.
Wow. Well, I want to say, first of all, that, I am the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, which is an organization of white people that was formed by the African People's Socialist Party, that's led by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, that is working for the liberation of Africa and African people, those on the continent of Africa and those who have been forcibly dispersed around the world, because the reason that African people are in the United States or Brazil or the Caribbean or Guyana is all for the same reason. They were kidnapped and sent there. And one of the fronts of the Uhuru movement created by the chairman and the party is the African People's Solidarity Committee, which is the organization of white people under their leadership. And this is, something that we have to, I really want to get into and talk about why that has to be that way.
Yeah, please do.
Because, and also I do want to start by acknowledging the incredible leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and just his fight, his entire life. He's 81 years old. He has relentlessly fought for the liberation of Africa and African people. And he's brilliant. He's amazing. Everything that truly that I understand about the world, which I could not understand as a white person, really. I can understand because of the analysis and his political understanding that's called African internationalism, which, as he says, is seeing the world through the eyes of the African working class. Mm-hmm. And that is something that I can embrace. White people can embrace that, under their leadership, white people can embrace that and because we see the world through the eyes of white people. And that is two different realities. So let me just say, first of all, I want to talk about that. Mm-hmm. And I want to say that I happened to be there when the African People's Solidarity Committee was being formed. I saw Chairman Omali Yeshitela speak in 1976. So, I have been in a member all that time, because, once I could see what he's saying and what the reality is in this country, in the world, how could I walk away from it? It's just like, well, things aren't better. They're not better today, than they were then because of these conditions that exist. And it was in Louisville, Kentucky. I had actually been living in Europe for a couple of years, and when I came back, a friend of mine, I'm from around Louisville, Kentucky, and a friend of mine was like, "Oh, you've got to come hear this speaker," which was Chairman O'Malley Shatella, who was coming to Louisville. And so I went, and one of the things he was saying is that they were getting ready to start a solidarity committee, and he was based in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is actually where the Uhuru House is and where some of the FBI raids were.
Mhm.
And because that's been the headquarters of the party for many, many years. And so there was going to be a conference in St. Pete. So, a bunch of people and myself, we went, and I joined, and that's how it got started. And it's really been an incredible journey, and it's just so powerful. And I think that, I just can't even say the significance of, of this last 40 something years of my life that have let me see the world in a whole different way, and and just be able to experience something really revolutionary and historic. So I would say that, and I think that it's really important for white people to understand the essence of what Chairman O'Malley Shatella is saying, which is that the struggle of African people, as he says, and they do use the term African people for Black people wherever they are, because the kidnapping of African people into the diaspora, whatever you call that, is something that robs a Black people of a nation, of a nationality. So this is what he's saying, that African people have a nationality. It's African. And
Right.
that what the chairman is saying is that the essential question in the world is colonialism. And I really see that. Like, once my eyes were open to that, I'm like, yes, that makes so much sense, and that the struggle isn't against racism, it's against colonialism, the same as oppressed people would be fighting against any place in the world. And colonialism means, an occupation, a domination, an exploitation by another power, not their own, a robbing of state power, a robbing of self-determination, and a robbing of resources, a theft of resources, both natural resources, labor, everything else. And that's all true of African people. And that the question is colonialism, and that there is colonialism inside, the borders of the United States. And that is so right, because there's two Americas. They're two completely different experiences. And you can see it here in St. Louis, you can see it anywhere in the US. And every statistic, whether infant and maternal mortality, I don't know if you just saw an article that was in the New York Times a week or so ago, that they found that even African women or Black women in the US who are rich, what's called rich, like make $150,000 a year, still have higher infant mortality and maternal mortality than poor white women in the United States. So I mean, these statistics are, you look at that, you look at police violence, you look at imprisonment, you look at life expectancy, you name it. You look at schools, you look at what conditions of neighborhoods look like. You just say anything, and there's two different realities. And so it doesn't chalk up to be an idea in white people's heads, but it chalks up to be the way that this whole system is created, exists. And that, as the chairman says, there wouldn't be an America, there wouldn't be a United States, there wouldn't be the world as it is today without the enslavement of African people and the theft of this land from the indigenous people. Otherwise, what would be here? And they try to marginalize that, when we, I think, that the struggles of African and indigenous people is forcing that to be changed somewhat. But I know, like in the state of Florida, they're trying to make illegal even discussing any of this. But I think that it's really true, because they try to say, well, it was just a blight on America's soul. Slavery was a blight. Well, wait a minute. So they try to just say, oh, it was this thing over here. But actually, it was the essential generator of the economy that we know as capitalism. That's how it was born, because Europe was in feudalism.
Well, that's why Florida doesn't want you to talk about it, among many other states that might go the same way, is because the way to fix those supposed identity politics problems is a whole lot of socialist communist policy that they also don't want kids to know about, So I mean, that's the way we've thought about it.
I think the essential question is the right of African people, indigenous people, and colonized people to have self-determination, to have control of their life, their culture, their economy. That belongs to them. And all around the world, U.S. controls this. And I think that we're seeing right now, a very much of a turning point in the world, where the BRICS nations, with Russia, Brazil, China, India, South Africa, all this, we're seeing that these are becoming more and more powerful, and the U.S. in this proxy war against Russia is, it's being exposed to the majority of the people on the planet Earth as like, this is crazy, this is insane, and that is obviously in a serious crisis. So we're in this period when the colonial question is really rising up again, and I think it's a lot due to the work of the African People's Socialist Party over many, many decades and years. And I think that for white people, here's the reality. All white people sit on the pedestal of slavery and genocide. Even poor white people do. That's why would you say that poor white people would want to join the Klan or fight Africans, not their ruling class? Because we all sit on this pedestal, and there's this meaning of what it means to be white is to be a colonizer. I mean, if you look at history, and this is why I wrote the book Overturning the Culture of Violence, because I wanted to take the political theory of African internationalism of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and go through history and show white people, this is what we did. This is what we did. This is not the government. White citizens lynched. White working people lynched. You look at history, there were volunteer cavalries that rode out to kill indigenous people and steal their land. Not just the government. It was like we were the government. You look at, I've read books of where, it shows that white children, and this is in books not that you find in school, but the kind that you can read, like about how African people were forced to breed, babies, and those babies were put on sale. And, it talks about in some of these books that, like, a white child could have an African adult lynched. That we have to look at that history. We have to take responsibility for that. We have to, we can't say, oh, we're this thing. And, there's a reason why white people came to this country, most of whom were poor in Europe. Well, why did white people get to walk up the ladder of success, but not African people, not indigenous people. You know, that's a political system. That's what capitalism is, and it's born of colonialism. And I think that, you know, that we have to look at that. It's not like, oh, it's one big melting pot. You know, it's not that. There is the white existence, there is the African existence, and certainly indigenous people, many of whom are still forced to live on what's called reservations, concentration camps, you know, in the greatest poverty in the whole country. You know, but yet it's just taken for granted that white people are supposed to have jobs and resources and send our kids to college and, you know, all of that. And I'm not saying that anybody shouldn't be able to do that, but that is the two realities that exist. Here in St. Louis, there's something called the Delmar Avenue Divide. The Delmar Divide, they call it, because if you go up any one of these given streets that go north and south, because the north side of St. Louis is some of the wards there are 97% African, and it's deep poverty. And this is where the Uhuru movement works and does its programs. Black Power Blueprint are in these, you know, in these neighborhoods, and that's where Chairman lives, and that's where he was raided, you know. It's just so telling, because on the north side, just the buildings, every other building is abandoned or, you know, falling down. But on the south side of certain streets that go east and west are gated mansions, you know, and it's all within, you could walk it, you know, and it's just so, it's so telling of what colonialism means. And this city, there's a really good book called by Walter Johnson called The Broken Heart of America, and it's about St. Louis. And it's really, really interesting, because first of all, St. Louis, this arch that's there, the symbol of St. Louis, is a symbol of genocide of the indigenous people, because manifest destiny, that's what that means, you know. And it's also the city where Dred and Harriet Scott petitioned for their rights to be in a safe haven for as enslaved people. And you know, it's the city where they were when it was ruled by the Supreme Court that Black people had no rights that a white person had to respect. And so, you know, there's the statue of Dred and Harriet Scott, and that's right across the street from where the arch is. You know, we have actions there sometimes to, like, you know, to like really show this. But this is, you know, this is what St. Louis is. And St. Louis did everything possible consciously to make sure that not only would they never put resources into predominantly African communities, and this is a city that's 50% African, 50% white, and that they had whole plans for this for decades, for really for a century, and where they had a plan that was called Let It Rot, Let It Rot in the African community of North St. Louis, whereas resources and streets are maintained and, you know, everything. And it's, you know, it's outrageous. And not that it's that different from any other city, because it's true everywhere in the United States, but, you know, it's just telling, it's just visible, it's raw in a certain way. And this is the city where, you know, just a very close northern suburb, just a half a mile from the Uhuru house really, is where Mike Brown was killed, you know, in Ferguson, which is really part of St. Louis or part of St. Louis County.
Right.
And, you know, so there were serious rebellions in 2014 here. But, you know, I just think that when you think about colonialism and what the chairman calls the colonial mode of production, how is everything made for white people? It's made through colonialism. There's no something that's separate from that. We have jobs because of stolen land and stolen labor. We can pass a house down, a property down from generation to generation. You know, that's what they mean when they say, what are the assets of the white population versus the assets of the African population? It means white people own land, property, homes, and they pass it down from, and even 401ks or, you know, inheritances.
Right.
And, you know, that's very little true in the African community in the US and by statistics. And so, you know, this is not just bad thinking. This is a system that is built to maintain this.
Mhm.
And yeah, and it's not saying, oh, every single person, every single African person. No, but what the party represents is the African working class and impoverished community, which is really the majority. And
Right.
so what we do is we organize in the white community. We have the Solidarity Center, which is one of the places that was raided on July 29th, is on the south side. It's on Gravois Avenue in St. Louis, in what's called the south side, the white community. We're surrounded, it's sort of on one of those diagonal streets that goes, you know, sort of crosses many different neighborhoods. And we go into all those neighborhoods and we hand out flyers, we talk to people, we have a lot of support. And on our building, which is actually owned by the party, by the African People's Socialist Party, but we, you know, we are able to use it. We raised resources for it. It's a beautiful building, and it has a banner that says "Unity through Reparations." And so many people just express their happiness that is there. You know, that there's so many white people here that we meet, and they say that, you know, they want to do something, but they don't know what to do. They really don't know what to do. And so when we raise reparations, these are resources that go to the programs that the party is building in St. Louis, and anybody can come. They have tours of them. They're beautiful, absolutely beautiful. They're coordinated by Deputy Chair Onison Ayashitela, who was also raided in, you know, with the chairman on July 29th, and who just brings like a beautiful, beautiful touch, gorgeous thing. Everything, it's nothing is crummy. Everything is beautiful. It's done first class. It's gorgeous. A basketball court, the renovation of a building for an African independence workforce program is just gorgeous. The doula program, the African Women's Center that they're going to be building, the beautiful, beautiful outdoor garden space, the Uhuru house, all of this. So I hope you can come, and anybody who's listening can come here. And
yeah, you make it sound like I want to actually come out to St. Louis to see it.
Rome's over there,
Did
right?
you mention?
Rome's over there, right?
No, Nick Cruz.
Nick's over there. Gotcha.
Yeah, Nick
Cruz is in St. Louis?
Yeah, he's in St. Louis. Yeah,
he's heading to Seattle to do some stuff with Kashama Sawan, I think, but I think generally he's there.
No, he's based in St. Louis. So
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So I think we definitely
I'd like to get in touch with him.
Yeah, we'll definitely
reach
out to him just to send that invitation for him. But since you mentioned reparations, I do want to talk about that because well, actually, let's do this. Define for our audience what is reparations, because I think especially when Black people say it, it like is very divisive. And for
what do you mean?
I believe, you know, like I'll rephrase it in this way. I think generally, and how I kind of interpret, I think the general idea of reparations is a check to Black people, essentially, which I feel is very simplistic and very like, it could mean money, but I think it's more inclusive of that. But I think like, and so especially for people who are non-Black, when they hear reparations, it's just the idea, oh, you're just going to give Black people money, and you know, and Black people are just going to use that money in not so great means. So, like, that's kind of like this, almost like the
Yeah, there's not a
stereotype.
lot of specifics talked about, or
Right.
yeah.
I just want people to kind of have an understanding of what, because it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
But if you can kind of explain,
Yeah.
you know, just given the larger scope of what it is, and and like the repercussions of, I think essentially in regards to your advocacy for it, like what does that mean for you since you are advocating for it as a white person?
Well, okay, I would say, first of all, I just wanted to give a little history, because
Yeah.
the African People's Socialist Party held the first tribunal on reparations for African people in the US in 1982 in Brooklyn, New York. And it was amazing. I had the honor of being there. And it actually, and their goal at the time, because reparations wasn't known that much at all. Nobody, you know, you'd be out talking about reparations and people would be like, what is that? You know? So their goal was to make reparations a household word. Everybody had to know, and certainly it is today. It is today. I think most people know what they have some idea of what is reparations. But that tribunal was actually used international law to, like the Convention on the Crime and Punishment, on the punishment and prevention of the crime of genocide. It's called the Genocide Convention. They use that. They use the human rights documents of the United Nations, accepted international law, to put the US government on trial for genocide against African people. And they had testimony from, first of all, from African experts on everything from history to education to, you know, to sociology, and also from actual activists, political prisoners, and Tupac's mother was there. I mean, you know, Afeni Shakur, and just, you know, all kinds of testimonies of people who were activists, people who, you know, and it was powerful. And there was a panel of judges, and they ruled that yes, the US government was guilty of genocide, number one. Number two, that African people, and this was in 1982, were owed $4.1 trillion just for stolen labor alone. And so I think that, yeah, I think that there are times, or, you know, a lot of times the question of reparations is simplified to maybe be a check, like that's what we're hearing.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that is reparations. But I also don't feel like that's a bad thing, because white people get checks all the time.
No,
you know?
right. I mean, look at what's happening to Ukraine, you know, so.
Yeah, they just gave how many billions, like 13 trillion or whatever it was there. You know, so I don't have a problem that California's, you know, they're saying in San Francisco, African people are owed $500,000 each or whatever. Good, great. Let that, because the wealth gap, they've already said, it came out a few years ago that the African community of the United States, it would take them 285 years to catch up to white people's income. So check, okay. But real reparations of as it is defined by the African People's Socialist Party is a revolutionary demand. And it's not about a paycheck. It's about what is owed to African people. And the way that the African People's Socialist Party lays it out is in that these reparations are the infrastructure for building an economy for and by and in control of African people. Right. And that's what they're trying to do. That's what they're doing. Right. That's what they're doing. And that's what they want to do around the world, because this economy that is called capitalism, or, you know, the colonialism is an economy that requires the impoverishment and theft of African people. And it's not over. It's not over at all, you know. In fact, one of the things that the tribunal in 1982 on reparations showed, and they had this brief and they did, you know, all this study of it, that they looked at from, I think, say like 1619 or whatever to 1982, not the 1865, not just 1865. And they found that actually since slavery, more has been stolen of stolen labor, you know, and the thing, so that's why they came up with the number of 4.1 trillion, and that was in 1982 dollars. Today, that would be 15 trillion, you know, whatever.
Right.
And the thing the chairman says is, this is not for pain and suffering. That's not even counting the lynchings, the terror, you know, because that is counted in court. You know, if you drop, you know, if McDonald's spills coffee on you and you're burnt, you can sue them. A woman sued them and got like $1 million for that. So what would African people get if they sued for enslavement and lynching and all of that, you know? So it's deep. It's really deep, and it's everything is owed. I mean, you know, it just has to be a whole new system. It has to, this system has to go.
Right.
Because
And I've said that on Twitter actually this week, is that I think it may have been, early in the week, that reparations cannot happen under capitalism. It can't.
Right.
Because the idea would be, if you're looking for, and I love what you said, that, you know, reparations is about economic empowerment for the oppressed. And so if you're looking for workers to, as we say, own the means of labor, that cannot happen under a capitalist system. Because, you know, the idea is that is counter to what capitalism is. So the key is to getting rid of this system entirely in order for reparations to occur. And I actually want to ask you, like, why? I don't think people are necessarily making that connection, though, which I think might go into the idea of, like, just give us money, you know, like, why do you think that is that, like, or at least why is that disconnect, you think, in terms of people thinking like that there's, I wouldn't say a possibility, but not talking about reparations without talking about the capitalistic bend of it that has to be removed?
Well, I think that the Uhuru movement always talks about that, but I think, you know, and there's still a lot of work to do, you know, but I think, I also think that people need money. I mean, I think that, you know, people, especially in the African community, need money. And I don't think that, so that's why I'm saying I wouldn't be against it. If, you know, if the state of California wants to pay, if the US government wants to pay a certain amount, I mean, they pay Japanese for, you know, for being interned, and they rightly so. Rightly so. They were interned during the Second Imperialist War. But I'm not against that. But I don't think that we should be. I mean, I'm not against that. And I don't think that anybody in the Uhuru movement would be against that. That's a payment. And that's good, because they have so much money and they're spending it on war, on killing people. You know, I mean, I was just reading statistics, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria that the US has led killed 900,000 people and displaced 37 million people. I mean, you know, that's what they spend their money on. War, bombs, drones, you know, attacking people through the FBI and killing people and putting African people in prison, mostly on drug questions, while they're making it legal. And they still don't let them out of prison.
Right.
You know, I mean, I just think that there's so much wrong. And for me, what my job is, you know, is to talk to other white people. And this is what we do. Because white people can just like, oh yeah, that's so bad. Okay, well, I'm still going I'm still going away for the weekend, and then it's just like, come on. Or I still have to, organize against the mistreatment of bunnies, or I don't know, it's just like we have to
Well, see, that
say
stuff affects them
this is
directly,
what's
you
real.
know? They notice
Mhm.
that stuff. Like, it's also the entire diaspora is out of sight, out of mind for the most part. It's like if we're
It
gonna be all
can be.
right, you know,
Yeah,
like these issues don't affect them generally as a whole,
right.
whereas like the poor and working class, which predominantly are, filled with
People of
minority
color.
and right, yeah, like they're far more affected by it. But our foreign policy is the same as our in that regard. We're still going
As the
after
domestic policy.
right, yeah, we're still going after right now we're sending Stacey Abrams to Nigeria to like
Mhm.
make sure their elections are going to be good. What do you think that's
Mhm.
about? Maybe
Okay,
resources
it's
that they all
about
want?
colonialism.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Like
Is I mean, there's a lot of oil in
Yeah.
Nigeria. There's a lot of resources all over Africa. Look at Congo. Look
yep.
what the US and Belgium did to Patrice Lumumba when
Hmm.
he said to Belgium, the resources of Congo are going to African people. What did they do? They immediately killed him,
Killed him.
cut up his body. I mean, they would just, it was hideous.
Yep.
So that's what they did. And you look at they talk about, oh, corruption in Africa. Well, they killed everyone that was fighting for Africa.
Right.
Kwame
And
Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara, even Gaddafi. I mean, they were
yeah,
fighting for Africa, and
Yeah.
we're all killed,
right.
by the US. And so white people can just go, oh, it's so corrupt there. I mean, but
Well,
we
not
still
even
love
that, but
this.
not even that. And I've spent time in East Africa. I spent time in Uganda, Rwanda, over the course of the last decade. And yeah, there's corruption there, but I also see, and I don't want to say this person's thing because I know people watch this show have certain feelings, and I want to respect, African people, like my family in Africa who are there,
Mhm.
but certain politicians kind of ride the fence in terms of assumingly being for their people, but also having their foot in terms of the West and wanting to build relationships with them, for their own profit. And then
Mhm.
and for me, I get kind of frustrated because I think people don't talk about this enough, especially like in Africa, like kind of this infiltration of capitalism kind of seeping in,
Well, it's
those
not new.
governments there too. So it's the same thing. The only the difference is that their own are kind of fulfilling that role instead of white
Mhm.
people in the West. To the
Well, look, the thing is that it's what the African People's Socialist Party calls neo-colonialism,
yeah,
where they have people, and it's really interesting because you see this actually in this city, or you see it in Africa, or you see it everywhere. What Chairman O'Malley calls the culture of corruption. There's no other way. I mean, just look at Turkey. What happened? They build those buildings there. I've been in Turkey without rebar. This is what they get away with because it's the same thing.
We're still
There's
sanctioning
no,
and we're still I mean,
exactly, and
yeah.
there's no way. And then there's corruption. That's the only way, look at Ukraine. All the people there are corrupt. They've already said that, they were replacing them. Oh, sure. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing because that's how, when colonial countries become, quote, independent,
Yeah.
they only get a little bit of what they don't get to control their economy. The people don't get to. So the people are under the same system.
And the
I
minute they
think
try
that,
to, Oliver North shows up,
yeah,
So
exactly. Whether, whether they've tried to overturn Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, all these places. And it's the same thing. The US still controls it because the US controls the world economy right now. And that's why it's really significant that this BRICS, BRICS and other kinds of economic arrangements are becoming stronger because, they're there to contend with this system. And it's not to say that they're not capitalists, because they are, but they're against the US, and that's important because it
Right.
continues to deepen the crisis here. So, I think that's really, really important. And I do, I think that our job, like I said, is to organize other white people. That's our assignment. And
Right.
to win this question of reparations, and to just say that, that we have resources. The only way that we can have resources is that other people have to suffer. That's the only way. And I'm not saying that like out of guilt or something. I'm just saying that's the reality.
Really, yeah.
So if we, if there is a system, and that's why, the chairman analyzes that all white people sit on the pedestal. It doesn't mean all white people are rich.
Mm.
This is what it means to be white, is to be a colonizer, is to have, it's still social wealth. It's still social wealth is in white communities. White people in general can find resources or have it somewhere in their family. This is how it works. And there is, this sense of being white is that I have power over other people. Otherwise, what would that mean? And I think that that what we're finding is, and we do have members of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement in like 140 cities in the United States. And, we want to build in Canada and Europe, and even on the continent of Africa, where, there are white settlers there as well. And that, I think that as the chairman says, that the working class is in the colonies.
Mm-hmm.
Working class, because it's not to say there aren't poor white people, but there is not a class of workers. The working class are colonized.
Right.
That's really have to see it, because the colonized make up the pedestal upon which white people sit, and
Right.
upon which this entire system rests. And and we look at, why is the US spending trillions of dollars, generally speaking, fighting colonized people? I mean, it's very rare that it has a war in Europe, which, Ukraine is very rare. But I mean, generally, because it's attacking Russia,
Right.
which is and China.
Like we did in Afghanistan, Iraq.
Afghanistan,
Like
Iraq,
pick a war
Libya,
in the last decade.
Syria,
Warland.
Somalia.
Yemen. Nobody even talks about that. That people are
Right.
starving to death. And just what it does to people, like the Philippines now. The US is building bases there again, and people in the Philippines are incredibly impoverished and struggling. And all around the world, the US is there to dominate and exploit and overturn any kind of movement of colonized people, whether it's inside the borders of the United States, around the world. And that's why the African People's Socialist Party was attacked, because it has a worldwide movement. It has members in Africa, in the Caribbean, in Europe, and it's building for the liberation of Africa, and in unity with indigenous people, and believes that, of course, that this land still belongs to the indigenous people, whether they speak Lakota or whether they speak Spanish, or Aztec, that this is the indigenous people's land, and it still is that. And white people don't have claim to this land. And and when we look at it in those terms, and that this movement, the African People's Socialist Party, is in unity with all colonized people. It is not reparations at the expense of somebody. It's not that at all. It is that the African Revolution frees the world. You know, it's in unity. And that's another question, because they said in the indictment that they used against to justify these raids that the chairman and the party were under the influence of Russia. I mean, that's insane, because they raised the question of reparations and genocide. And I mean, that's absolutely outrageous, but it's also the tactics and strategy that the party has always had, and it's been in existence for 50 years, to find all supporters for the right of African people to be free and liberated. And they found, they have a relationship with Russia, because Russia supported them, just like Ireland, the struggle in Ireland and Nicaragua, you know, all around the world. The Palestinians they support. So, you know, that's why they were attacked, because it's not because of their position on this war, that this is obviously a US war against Russia, because other people say that. The chairman was the first to say that, I would just say. He said that the day the war started. But, you know, the point is that this is why, because they are fighting for an anti-colonial struggle and the unity of African people, indigenous peoples, you know, oppressed and colonized, Arab, you know, all oppressed and colonized people around the world, to be, you know, just to be this, it's this that makes up the pedestal upon which the US and Europe sit. And that is what is being challenged right now. And that's what's very exciting. It really is. It's very, very exciting to me, because in the 1960s and 50s was a time when the anti-colonial movement of the world was the trend. The revolution was the trend. The Che Guevara, the Fidel, you know, all of these movements, and Ho Chi Minh and Vietnam, and all these heroic movements around the world, and the Black Power movement within the United States. You know, it was just like the people are winning. But then the US government waged a counterinsurgency inside, and that means a war against people who are fighting for their national liberation. And that inside this country, one of the most known fronts was called COINTELPRO, which I'm sure you are familiar with. You know, that assassinated, in fact, Malcolm X's daughter, they're filing charges against the CIA and the FBI for killing their father. You know, just the murder, the assassination of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton, and so many others, as well as the mass arrests and the political prisoners. You know, people like Sundiata Acoli, who was in prison for 50 years and he just got out because he's very ill. Right. You know, and probably facing death, and Mutulu Shakur, and, you know, so many, Jalil Muttaqin, you know, just so many others who, you know, are political prisoners, and the US won't even admit that, but that comes from that period of struggle and this counterinsurgency to, you know, to fight back this, what was truly an African revolution of that period. That was very, very incredible to see, you know. And you were asking earlier, I just want to address this really quickly, because you were talking earlier, I think before we came on the air, about, you know, just the white left and the white right, or whatever. I think that it's really important to understand that the white left, and like all other white people, sit on the pedestal, the oppression of African people. And generally speaking, I know this movement, the Uhuru movement, African People's Socialist Party, has struggled fiercely with the white left, because it sees itself as, you know, the leaders of the revolution, and treat African people and indigenous people as sort of amendments or mini white people. You know, just it's really opportunist, and it's white nationalist, and it's
exploitative
like,
in nature, and Yeah.
Exactly. It doesn't.
Exploitive, elitist, I think especially more so,
Yeah.
given certain personalities in the space who do carry that air. I'll say arrogance, but obviously usually college educated. So so having the air of, oh, we know better because we went to this school, we studied this person, we did this theory and all this kind of stuff, and not necessarily talking to the people that it ultimately affects.
Right.
Right. And thinking they would still be in leadership. That's why
Right.
they created the white segment of the Uhuru movement under the leadership. Because, you know, and I think that it's really important to understand that. And certainly, you know, there are all different kinds of organizations who are supporters, but that this has been a huge struggle within the African liberation movement, because white people want to come in and control it and tell, you know, and say, oh, well, this is what you really need to be doing, like you're saying, you know, and they're like, no, you know,
Right.
This is self-determination. And if white people want to support it, but it's also in our interest, because white people are never going to lead a struggle that overturns the system. It's bought out every time, you know.
Right.
And I think that because we sit on the pedestal, it has to be led by those who make up the pedestal of what the chairman calls, you know, the pedestal of the society. That is the leadership. That is just so clear, you know, the struggle. And if you look at this country, every progressive thing has come from the Black liberation movement over the years. Even women, white women's, you know, LGBTQ, all of this came from, because I remember when it was called gay liberation. Now they've changed that, you know, but they take the liberation out. But it's like, that's what it was called. It was called women's liberation, gay liberation, based on African liberation.
Yeah.
You know,
think,
and just sparking this.
Just even Bernie Sanders, like, and I didn't make this connection till maybe like a few weeks ago, but he used, you know, like his talking points as far as support, like from Black activists.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Angela
they
Davis
stole the word woke.
Woke.
You know, like,
so, like almost verbatim, like what he was saying in terms of like the oppressed, like came from, you know, like Black activism. So
That's right.
You know, so what would you, so two things, and then I know there's something we want to definitely talk to you about before you go. So how do you, and I kind of know the answer, but I think you can share with our community here, how do you guard against the pedestal, as you say, and what, in terms of what your work within the movement, and what would you say to white people who are looking to really get involved in the struggle, so to speak, to really truly be, I don't want to say ally, but like work in solidarity with oppressed peoples, you know?
I would say join this movement, because the thing is that, first of all, it's not charity. It's in our interest. And I just want to say the white population is in a crisis. I mean, the amount of drug addiction, alcoholism, suicide on all levels. And it was really, really interesting, these articles that have been in the media lately about the alienation and lonely, you know, these articles that like 60% of young white men are not in relationships, and they have no friends. I mean, this is really serious, but it's like white people are in a crisis. And the thing is that if we hate the society, then we should be under the leadership of the force that's going to change it. Because, you know, we can't absorb this crisis of imperialism if we need to change the society, and we have a role to play. And, you know, that's why we call on white people to join this movement, because African people are going to win.
Yeah.
I am without a doubt. And everybody will be brought along. I mean, the struggle of Arab people, indigenous people, all throughout the Americas, all of this is going to win. For one thing, white people are dying, not reproducing. I mean, there's not going to be white people at a certain point, but the system will still be there. And that it's got to go. It has to go. There can't be neocolonialism or anything else. The majority of the people on this planet have a right to live. They have a right to save the planet, because it's this system that's creating the environmental crisis and, and everything else. Any problem, it's the system.
Right.
And I think that white people, this is our revolution too. That's how I see it. This is how we see it. This is our revolution too, because we are not going to lead a revolution. We can be under the leadership and unite with the fact that African people are going to be free. They're going to have what belongs to them, and that's only right. And indigenous people and the oppressed peoples are going to be free. That is the trend in the world. And that's what we're seeing play out step by step. And the African People's Socialist Party has been a leading force in fighting for that and putting this forward and putting forward the analysis that the world has to be turned right upside up. The narrative of whiteness has to go. The narrative of the African, the indigenous, that's what has to be number one.
Right.
And that's what we have to win too.
Yeah.
You're not all that, everything we have is stolen. And so why do, we think it's normal that African people would be killed down in the streets and a policeman would just stand on the neck of an African man and, oh, well, that's really sad, but it's normal. It's not normal. It's not normal. That we can't say that, there has to be the right of African people to have control over what happens to them. And that's what it's in our interest, and I think that the contradictions that white people face, the alienation and all this is from being alienated from the rest of the world and from humanity, that we want to see this system go. African people are serious about making it go,
Yeah.
And I think that it's in our interest. And that's something that we really try to win and show, and I think that there are many white people who see this, who want to see it, who want to stand in solidarity. And that's why, that's why the party doesn't say that we are allies, because allies is kind of equal in a certain way.
Yeah.
It's saying solidarity. And I unite with that, because it's like, again, turning the world right side up. So all of, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And it's how it has to be. And that is what is happening. It
Right.
is what is happening.
So to conclude, because I will first say this has been such a joy to have you on. How can people get involved?
Well, yes, I just want people to know about, anybody from the white community, and actually anybody can come, the national conference of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And the title of it is White People Say No to the FBI War on Black Liberation. It's the Uhuru Solidarity Movement organizing in the white community for reparations to African people under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, Saturday and Sunday, March 11th and 12th. And it's going to be here in St. Louis. There is a component on Zoom, but we would love for you to come, and there's going to be a tour of all the projects of the Black Power Blueprint. There's going to be great, it's going to be really, really fantastic. Some of the lawyers for the Uhuru movement are going to be here. Of course, Chairman Omali Shatella is going to be here. Deputy Chair Onizane. Akile Anai is going to be here in town. So we'd love for people to come and actually experience it, or, you can participate on Zoom. So you can go to uhurusolidarity.org and find out more about it. Or you can sign up on Eventbrite at usmconvention2023.eventbrite.com. So, or you can go to uhurusolidarity.org.
Yeah.
It'll tell you more.
Yeah. And actually, we do have all of your links. So your Twitter, your Facebook,
Okay,
the
great,
committee, and the solidarity links in
great.
in the description, so people can learn more if they want to, and if they want to participate, they can. And if you're in the St. Louis area, I hope people, or at least in the vicinity, that people can come in and kind of see
Yes,
the work
yes,
that
we
you
would
are
love to
doing.
have you in and coming. And
Yeah,
I hope
yeah,
you come one of
yeah,
these days.
I'm definitely inspired now to definitely come out to St. Louis to visit. So yeah, definitely I will graciously accept your invitation if I get my finances
And if
together.
you're ever in DC again, Colin's always
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
You know.
I'm in
Okay.
DC,
Oh, you're in
so
DC.
I'm
Okay,
in DC proper, yeah.
Yeah.
So
great,
So
great.
so
Yeah,
yeah.
Black and Fat has a march in DC every November, so we usually go to that.
okay.
That'll
All
be
right.
Fantastic. I've got links in the description below for you, as well as underneath you. They have your Twitter handle in case people want to find you directly. But otherwise, been great having you. We'll be
Okay,
right back
so much.
with stories, people. So stay right there.
all right.
But
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure talking to both of you.
you're
Thank you, Ben. I
welcome.
appreciate you.
And
Okay.
Uhuru, and we always say
Uhuru.
through reparations.
Perfect.
All right.
Let me go here.